And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What is up, everybody? Nick on the P2W Fantasy Podcast here with Kevin on our weekly show in December now. We are heading closer and closer to playoffs. I don't know where the season went, what happened. I guess we had a bunch of shows during this 2021 season, but what's been up with you, Kevin, outside of our conversations for like 15 minutes before this podcast happened?
Hey, I'm just hanging out. I'm wondering why Darren Ravel is such a douche on Twitter. He's definitely the worst account I've ever seen. I'm arguing with people right now because I said Dynasty League should not have trade deadlines, and all these weirdos are using but the NFL has trade deadline. What kind of corny ass argument is that? I just don't get it. I'm just fighting with people on Twitter. That's been my role tonight.
Well, it's better than like in person or something along those lines. You get in trouble for those sort of things, but
you do.
Yeah, it's people are just spicy on the internet, man. I don't know what else to say. It's weird because like sometimes you see the people in person, they're not as spicy. I saw a bunch of people at Expo that were a lot more spicy on the internet, but that's a whole nother story. What we got going on today? Let's shift into some actual fantasy football talk here. Heading into week 14, which for this year with the extended season is the week prior to the actual playoffs. Pretty exciting stuff. Is this week for you important in any of your leagues? Like you have to win this week to get in?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a league where I have Jonathan Taylor, unfortunately, and he's out this week, and I'm 7-6 or whatever it is, and I need a win. And the guy behind me, if he wins and I lose, he's going to beat me on total points in the tiebreaker. So I need to win, but I'm rolling out some ugly ass running backs this week, and so it's going to be one of those games where we'll see what happens. I needed Justin Fields to play. So I'm glad Justin Fields is playing because my other quarterback's on a bye as well. So Justin Fields has a chance to lead me to the playoffs. So your quarterback out here be out there. So I'm in a few leagues like that. A few I'm going for the first seed, and I need to kind of get that bye. And so it's going to be an exciting week. It sucks that Jonathan Taylor's out though. That hurts me a little bit.
I don't know why he personally planned to be on a bye on week 14. I thought that was a little selfish. Yeah, it makes sense at the end of the day. Maybe he's just saving himself to go off in the playoffs. I'm in one must-win matchup right now and I'm 5-8 in this division. And it's so funny because the first place team is 9-4. I beat him last week. And then the second, third, fourth, and fifth place team, we are all 5-8. So it comes down to literally this matchup for our entire division. And I'm looking at my roster. I got Mitchell, Higgins, Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, and Darren Waller with either a Q or an O next to their name right now. So I'm pretty nervous about that. But we'll see. We'll see how things go. As always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group, a one-stop shop for everything fantasy related. I dropped a video promo today about the website. They got a massive discount. If you want articles, if you want rankings, projections, streams, DFS content, you name it, it's all in one spot. You can use my promo code 21WIN10 for a discount on top of the discount. All right, so what we got going on today, heading into week 14, we are going to talk about some cut candidates before the playoffs because it's important to buff that roster up before you do hit the fantasy playoffs. Then we're going to talk about some dynasty trade targets for contenders and our starts of the week. So stick with us here.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel, but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right, before we get into the cut candidates, it can be anything, Kevin. What's some advice for dynasty managers? We'll say dynasty because you can be more active in those leagues who won't make the playoffs this season. So they're looking at their standings. It doesn't matter what happens this week. They are not going to make the playoffs. Any advice you can give to those people? Because obviously that's a big market of people in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I always just, stay up on it. Trade guys like Myles Gaskin and other guys that definitely don't have a value. There's the value cliff's gone, but the guys like Gaskin could be reliable for like contenders that need a little bit of depth, and you could get a second for him right now when you're not going to be able to get that after this. Go after guys like CMC. Go after those injury guys. Kind of grab some of those guys. ETN is a target I've been targeting in a couple leagues that I'm kind of down on, and I actually traded Josh Jacobs for Travis Etienne. And so, like, I think these are moves that you can kind of make, and it doesn't have to always be injured guys. It can be other guys too. But I always try to grab those guys, Dobbins, those other dudes that are out there, and because dudes now know they got to go for it. If you're a dynasty that doesn't have a trade deadline, which it shouldn't, I think that's valuable because it helps out your bottom teams, and you can continue to kind of trade and fill gaps that you need, and it helps with your rebuild. So I think that's that. Don't always go grab draft picks. Draft picks are fine, but go get some players too. And Travis Etienne is a guy that I think is a good buy right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we're going to talk about on the flip side, if you are a contender, some guys you should target to give you that push. But that should be your target trade market right there, is the guys that are for sure going to go to the playoffs, and they're looking for the veterans that are going to buff up their dynasty squad. So if you do have some aging veterans that you don't really see a bright future for, now is the time. Go hit up the guy in first place and say, hey, you just lost a running back. Like, here's this guy that I have no business using next season. Another piece of advice I'll throw out there is keep being active with waiver wire, because some dynasty leagues you have like 25 bench spots, right? So maybe this doesn't apply, but I'm in one or two actually that the bench spots are more than a redraft, but it's really not that extensive. So I know in one, I'm a contender this year, but I'm looking at my roster and I know I'm for sure not going to use some guys the rest of this season. So I went and grabbed some younger guys that really haven't, broken out yet, that were sitting on the waiver wire. So I'll say that. Make sure you stay active with the waiver wire. If you see some young guys are starting to get some snaps, some involvement, but they don't get picked up, go grab those guys as well. I think staying active with the waiver wire is really important too. Don't just check out. Dynasty leagues, it's the wrong time of the year to completely check out for the fantasy season.
No, I agree. I think you just have to be active, right? And I think it comes in all plays. And this is where you start rebuilding for next year. You start acquiring assets, building your rosters. Like, you don't wait until February. You don't wait till March. Like, this is where the good managers kind of separate themselves, and you have some fun with it. And hopefully that your leagues have a wild card spot for total points. Like, hopefully that you get in leagues like that kind of allows you not to have to worry about the head-to-head matchups, because sometimes that's some bullshit. Like, I have 11-2 team that I know is going to get just worked, because I see it. I see the playoffs. I say I'm going to get the 1 seed, but I look and I know that I'm probably going to lose in that second round because my team is soft, and I know that I didn't trade my first round pick because of that.
And just on a completely random and side note here, Raiders are giving kicker Daniel Carlson an extension. If anybody wanted to know this piece of information, he's now
breaking news.
Carlson. This is breaking news live on the live stream. Carlson will be the 3rd highest paid kicker in the league on the Raiders there. So if that's of interest to you, hey, you might want to go grab him off your waiver wire potentially if he's not on a team. All right. So big piece of this podcast today, we are going to look at some cut candidates before the playoffs. Why? Because people get even more strategic with their roster spots going into playoffs, the contenders. Some people, and I kind of talked about this before, some people will roster an extra defense because they know that this defense doesn't necessarily have a good matchup this week, but they have a good playoff schedule, so they'll stash that. Some people will go and play the blocking game. They'll go grab the running backs that they don't need to block it from their opponent. There's various strategies when it comes to building and having a good roster going into the playoffs. And when you do shift around your roster, you have to make some cuts. So I'm going to go through a bunch of guys that might be on that border of keep or cut. And Kevin and I will go through if we want to keep them or cut them in redraft leagues. So now we're focusing on redraft leagues here. First guy, Kevin, rostered in 58% of leagues, Christian Kirk. So 4.5 and 1.4 the last 2 games for fantasy points, 8 targets between the 2 weeks. Hopkins is back. So he had 15 targets for Kyler. 15 attempts for Kyler only last game in his first game back. So what are we thinking about Christian Kirk? Is this a cut candidate or are you keeping him?
No, I think you keep him just because of what he did. I mean, obviously last game he did not look great, but I think you keep him. I like that he plays Detroit in the first round of playoffs. So, I think that it's a pretty good matchup. Indianapolis could be an interesting matchup. And Dallas, yes. But I think Dallas is susceptible to the pass. You saw what the Raiders have done. Like, I think that's a softer defense there. So I actually like his matchup. So moving forward, I like what he's going to see and his matchups moving forward. As far as the targets and stuff go, I think realistically what you're looking for is if you're going to start him, you're looking for that like 5 target, like 4 catch, 50-yard and a touchdown game. You want him to score a touchdown. I think that's kind of like realistic. So there's some risk to him, but I think based on what's left, probably he's fine. I think he's going to be okay. But basically for me, it's the matchups. Now he's playing the Rams this week. I don't know how much I love that matchup. Now he did because again against the Rams the first game he only had 1 target, 1 catch. But I do think Detroit, Indianapolis, and Dallas sets yourself up for if you have some injuries or if you kind of need to start him, you can. And I think you can be a little bit comfortable with that.
I think another point to add to this, because I'm with you too. I think he's a guy to keep. I agree about the schedule. We've seen him be very useful plenty of times this season. I know there's a lot of names out there right now. People are talking about Jalen Guyton from the Chargers, and people are talking about trying to think of another name that just popped up. The rookie Josh Palmer on the same team. Nick Westbrook, Akinney on the Titans. These guys that we really haven't seen a ton out of this season. Christian Kirk we have, though. He's had 5 games somewhere in between 18.54 and 33.56. That is a perfect flex play on a given week that you need it. So will he do that every single week? No, but I think just knowing that his ceiling can be that, knowing that he can have these games, also knowing that Deandre Hopkins is not 100% right now. He came out and he played, he scored. He played a season low for him when he's actually played 74% of the snaps this past game. So I'm not convinced Hopkins is going to be forced into 12 targets in the next 2 games. I think he's going to be kind of eased in because they want to win a Super Bowl this year. So that's my additional thoughts there on Christian Kirk. I was trying to add, look at that. That's too big. Cut candidate. So I was going to put it on the bottom here. Too big. All right. Next guy on the list here. Guy I really liked. I was pounding the table on all my waiver wire videos earlier on in the season. There was a lot of signs pointing in the right direction, but not so much right now. So Rashad Bateman, he's only rostered in 38.1% of leagues, but a lot of people have been hanging on, including myself. I have been in more than one redraft league, but after his 14-point week, his fantasy scores have been 5.9, 7.1, and then a goose egg 0. 70% of the snaps for Chicago, and now they've been trending down 44% and 45% the last 2 games. Devin Duvernay played more last game than he did. Watkins has also been floating around the same snap percentage, so they're kind of juggling their time on the field. Are you keeping Rashad Bateman in redraft?
I don't, this is crazy to say. I just don't think so, right? I think he's a wide receiver 3 on a run-first offense. And at the same time, his target count has dropped the last 3 straight weeks. And with Sammy Watkins coming back, his snap share was just 44% last game. And that's behind Watkins, Marquise Brown, and Devin Duvernay. And he's basically the 6th option on that team. Like, that's not fantasy viable right now. And like, I can't trust him, especially in these money weeks. Like, I don't see how you can trust him right now. And I think the snap share kind of, that pretty much when I looked at that and I saw Sammy coming back and all of that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Maybe we should have been dropping him a little recently. I think that we had that high hopes for him, like you talked about. I like Bateman. I think he's going to be good. But with that snap share, targets, everything, I'm probably out. I think he is a cut candidate.
Yeah, everything is just trending in the wrong direction at this point. So I think we're chasing known talent versus usage right now. And the usage is not there. He's not on the field. I'm with you. It just doesn't make sense at this point to keep him. If someone got banged up, then yeah. And I think the only someone would be Hollywood Brown or Mark Andrews. I don't think anybody else really matters for this offense here. Lamar Jackson's got to pick his game up a bit too, but it doesn't change his involvement with the offense and how much he's on the field. Next guy on the list is rostered in more leagues than Bateman. He's rostered in 61.2% of leagues. Emmanuel Sanders. So weeks 1 through 6, he was the wide receiver 23. He averaged 15 points per game. So he was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Since the bye, weeks 8 through 13, he's been the wide receiver 62. He's averaged 5.7 fantasy points. Also, since the bye, the targets have just been sporadic. He's had a game with 2 targets. He's had a game with 8 targets, and then everything in between. What's our thoughts here on Emmanuel Sanders for the rest of the season?
I'll be honest. This is probably the toughest one on the list. The other guys are pretty cut and dry. I think feel like either way. Everything you bring out is a good point. I do think, this last game against New England, which was a terrible game script, right? I think he had 6 targets, though. He did have the second leading targets of the game. So I do think he's getting the targets. So when you look at him, he's been there, but he's not putting up fantasy points either. So when you're looking at what he's doing here, he hasn't, after that bye week, he's been awful. And so to me, I'm still going to hold him because I think he's kind of that boomer bust guy. I think they got to figure out that offense. I think it's more about that offense and what they're trying to do. I would say you still keep him, but it's close. I understand if you dropped him to 100%. I think for me in that offense with Allen, and he's getting the second amount of targets, and I think they are looking his way. I could see him being there, and they're going to throw the ball. They're playing Tampa Bay, Carolina, New England again, and you'd have to think that game's going to be a little different. Atlanta, if you can keep him on your roster and you can keep going. I like his matchups going forward, but it's risky. I think he's the riskiest one on here, and I wouldn't be opposed to dropping him either.
Yeah, I think if you have the leeway to give him a shot at this next matchup and see what happens, I think I might wait just this week. But if it's the same sort of thing, I mean, he's been terrible for fantasy the last handful of weeks. His high has been 10.5. He had a goose egg, and then he's had a bunch of 5-point games. He's actually had 3 weeks in a row with 5 fantasy points and some change to the decimal point. So I'm with you on the matchups. Some of the matchups look okay on paper. But if he goes against Tampa Bay and he does nothing again, then I'm 100% cutting him before the fantasy playoffs because it's too many weeks in a row getting burned. And then you're going in and potentially flexing him, hoping that he has like a week 2 performance when he hasn't been good, since the bye, which has been wild.
If he doesn't do good against Tampa, it's over. It's like you might as well just if you're gonna hold him one more week, you might as well wait. And if he does good, great.
Next guy on the list, Allen Robinson, Chicago Bear, rostered in 66.6% of leagues. That number was probably like 93 at some point this season. Not so much anymore. He's not played in the past 2 games. He's had a hamstring issue. While playing, he has yet to score 11 fantasy points. So he's gone all of these weeks, even when he was completely healthy, not scoring well for fantasy at all. I'm not sure if he's practicing just yet. I'd have to go and get that actual.
He said he was limited. He said he was limited today.
There you go.
He's been limited all year.
Are you hanging on to him? He hasn't had one even okay fantasy game this season. But I mean, we know who he is, I guess, from the past.
I feel like 66% of people that have him, like 45% of that is just name recognition. Like, oh, it's Bears Allen Robinson. Bears fans, true, yes. I can't cut Allen Robinson. It's Allen Robinson. It's like Allen Robinson has sucked. Like, in my opinion, I think Allen Robinson should have got dropped probably after that Tampa game, right, where he put up just a terrible line. You had like 3 points, PPR points, which is absurd. To me, you drop him. I think he should have already been dropped. And I get that, it's Allen Robinson, where he's from, who he is, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think I'm kind of out on him. Like, I think he's got to do something. Like, in my opinion, like before you can draft him, he should have been out. He should have been dropped a few weeks ago. He's the most. I'm gonna tell you right now, Nick. I have him on a dynasty league that I really am continuing on, and he's effing me right now, and he's killing me. Like, I can't get rid of him, and he's not. And you think he would be able to? The game scripts have all been bad. Your Bears suck. Like, you would expect them to throw the ball, and he just hasn't. He just hasn't done it.
I mean, dynasty wise, you're hoping he goes somewhere else at this point. He's been just like a gaping hole in your fantasy team, though. And
he has 339 yards receiving and 1 touchdown this year. Like, that is insane to be. I mean, what? He had like a 3rd, 4th round ADP. Like,
he was. 100%. And he was drafted as a top 12 guy.
he's got to be one of the most disappointing players this year, like by far. Like he's got to be one of the up there, and
he's got to be the most. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can think of another. I mean, let's say out of guys not injured, we're not going to talk about Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, like guys who were injured, guys who were healthy most of the season. I mean, he missed 2 games, but he's got to be number 1. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of the top of my head. I mean, a quarterback's a little different. I mean, if you wanted to say like Trevor Lawrence, who's been awful, some of these other guys there, but I would say, yeah, based on his ADP and where he was getting drafted. I mean, Darnell Mooney is wide receiver 24 right now. Like Darnell is playing way better than him, and he's wide receiver 24. He's doing that, and he has a good connection with Fields. So to me personally, I think that's the guy you want, and Allen Robinson's second fiddle.
And again, all these cut candidate advice obviously has to do with the sort of league you're in and what guys you can pick up. But if we're looking at the waiver wire this week, guys I want the rest of the season, it's strange to me, but I'll probably take Russell Gage. I'll probably take KJ Osborne before I take Allen Robinson, because those guys have actually scored well in fantasy this season. And are they as talented? Probably not. I mean, at the end, no. Yeah. But have they produced for fantasy, and do I want to win a championship this year? The answer is yes for both of those. So it's strange. The next 2 I want to list because I saw this twice this week. People asked this question. The Broncos wide receivers. So you got Jerry Judy, 79.9% rostered. Cortland Sutton, 79.5% rostered. Surprised that they're like so similar in how much they're rostered. Neither guy has scored 13 fantasy points in their last 5 games played. Cortland Sutton, on the other hand, has not scored above 6 fantasy points in his last 5 games. And then Sutton's targets since Jerry Judy has returned, since he returned in week 8, his targets have been 4, 2, 3, 3, and then 6. Maybe things are turning around for him with that 6 target week. But what are our thoughts on the Broncos wide receivers?
Cut them all, like all of them, even Fant. Get rid of every single one of those guys. Like, I just don't see. Teddy's terrible. Locke is not obviously much better. They're going to run the ball, and if Melvin Gordon comes back, I understand that. They have the system is bad. To me, you cannot confidently start either one of these guys. Like when you look at Judy or Sutton, you can't start these guys. So why are they on your roster? Because you're not going to be able to start them. Even if one went down, it wouldn't matter because their quarterback play is so bad. Where they're going, and I think it was last game. I think 8 different players had a target by like the second or like by the second quarter. So they also spread the ball around. They got Patrick, they got all these guys, and it's like they're using all of these different guys. Albert O is out there. They got all these different guys that they're using, and it's just not these guys. They're not fantasy relevant. They're great players. Next year with Russell Wilson, it's gonna be amazing. But this year, I'm out. I'm cutting. I'm out.
I like that. I like that with the
Russell. You're Judy. I know you're a Judy guy, so I know you're probably going to keep Judy.
I am, and I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be bold here, and I'll clip it. If I'm wrong, I'll call myself out because I did a bunch of clipping last week on rights and wrongs. I'm not saying to start Jerry Judy this week. I'm going to say though, I'm going to say this week Jerry Judy is going to score 15 fantasy points. He's going to be a decent flex, and the reason being is, I think he's got a clear connection with Teddy Bridgewater. We've seen it before where he's had games of 8 and 9 targets. I think he's very talented. This past game, 4 catches for 77 yards. I mean, that's pretty good. Javonte Williams absolutely was running all over the Chiefs last game. And I'm not going to say they won't do that against Detroit because they should. But I think rest of season, if there's any sort of competition of a game where it's really, really back and forth, I think we're going to see better out of Jerry Judy just because he's gradually been coming back from an injury. I mean, it was an ankle injury. He's a big route running guy. I'm going to be bold and say this is going to be a week that he scores 15 fantasy points. And I'll clip it. If I'm wrong, I'll say I'm an idiot for saying that. But I'm going to hang on to Jerry Judy. I'm not going to play him this week. But I'm going to be bold and say this is going to be a decent week out of Judy.
Last week, you can't be bold and then not start him. What is this? That's not
all right. So I'm going to say you can. I'm going to say it just depends on your roster. I actually have to flex Jerry Judy, so maybe that's why I'm saying that.
Me too.
In a league, there's a league I have to flex him, but Cortland Sutton, there's zero reason reason he should be on any rosters right now for redraft. I don't see any reason.
No, I trust Judy more than Sutton. No, I trust Judy more than Sutton. If I had to pick, I would do that just because that Bridgewater connection's real. And Sutton, Bridgewater's arm can't get it to Sutton. That's a problem. So that's just kind of the mindset. Now, if Drew Lock came in and they did move to Drew Lock, I think Sutton plays a little bit of a role because of that connection they had a couple years ago. But even then, it's hard to play both these guys.
What about Marvin Jones Jr., MJJ? I posted that the other day, and somebody asked, like, who's MJJ? I forgot. I can't, like, just throw out acronyms and expect everybody to know. He's rostered in 67.6% of fantasy leagues. He has been the wide receiver 55 since the bye. Frustrating because he had games of 18.7, 17.5, and 23 fantasy points in some of the weeks before the bye. Now he's had 6 weeks under 10 fantasy points. What are we thinking about Marvin Jones?
You know, I have a rule in life that if you're getting out-targeted by Laquan Treadwell, I don't feel like you can keep him on your roster. And Treadwell's back somehow. And, you know, he had better Treadwell out-targeted both him and LaVisca last game, which is that says everything you really need to know about Jacksonville and what's going on there. So, like, again, me personally, if Treadwell's getting more targets and doing those types of things on offense, and you got to remember too, they have game scripts that are asked all year. Like, it's not like Marvin just hasn't had game scripts. It's, hey, they lost by 30 to the Rams and you got 3 targets, 2 catches. Like, I'm out with Marvin as well. Like, I just don't see it with being in there. And again, if Treadwell's out targeting you and out producing you already, like, that's a problem.
That and, you know, I'm not going to put the full blame on Lawrence, but I'm going to talk about Lawrence's numbers and how it literally caps everything about this offense. Since the bye as well, they played in 6 games since the bye. There has only been one time where Lawrence has thrown above 60% for his completion percentage during those games. So that's one thing. So the actual hitting the targets has not been there. Is it on Lawrence? Yeah. Is it on the actual targets? Who knows? I'm not going to grind the tape and go that deep. Here's another thing. Most of these games have been under 200 passing yards. That's another cap to this offense. Here's another thing. Since the bye and all those weeks I just said, Trevor Lawrence has only thrown 2 touchdowns. So literally there's no perks at all to this offense right now. So I think that Marvin Jones, I think we got Nate in the chat. He actually did on the Sports Me. I put that out there, and that was one of his cut candidates. I asked Sports Me who are some cut candidates, and he said Marvin Jones. I'm with you though. I think that there's just no opportunity in this offense. I don't want anybody in this offense. James Robinson, I still got faith in him. I think that last game I was talking about this. Did you think he got benched because of the fumbles? Because I think he got benched because of his heel and his foot injury. Plus, they were losing the game. They lost the game 37-3. Like, why play the guy? I still think he's okay, but nobody else.
Yeah, no, I think he's okay, but I also think he's a volatile asset as well. Like, I think he got the nagging injury as Etienne coming back. They're going to change a lot of that offense up. That offense is just putrid. Urban's putrid. Lawrence has not played well, like you've been mentioning. There's a lot of issues there. I mean, if you're starting a Jaguar, you're probably not doing very well in your fantasy leagues.
No, probably not.
That's probably part of that. But if you have Marvin, I would probably drop him. Like in terms of this, like if you're relying on these guys, and especially with Robinson banged up and what they're doing, I don't know. I can't be there with you. Like you said, you mentioned all the good stuff. Now, I mean, you know, it sucks because week 15 and 16 they play Houston and the Jets.
Yeah.
The Jets are terrible. So you look at the Jets and their pass defense, I think they're ranked last in the NFL. They could realistically go out there and look amazing against them. I mean, you know, and the mindset Gardner just did, these other areas, you could see that big blow up game in there. So maybe you look at that schedule and you say, hey, maybe we keep him for those 2 games and we see what he can do. So I understand maybe that, but I would wait, maybe pick him up later.
Yeah. MJJ here. He's just he's frustrating because we saw it happen before. We saw it, you know, him have these decent weeks. Like Allen Robinson, who I talked about before, we never saw him have a good game this season. But Marvin Jones Jr., we actually have. But next guy, maybe we can run through the next couple pretty quick. But
yeah,
this one actually might be kind of tough because, you know, it's important to make sure that we have certain backups in the league, and Mark Ingram has been a good one when he's got, I mean, last week was pretty bad, 3.6 fantasy points versus your Dallas Cowboys. But Kamara's back. We saw Mark Ingram have some good games when Kamara's been out. We also saw that Mark Ingram got some touches while Kamara was healthy. And, I'm not sure that Kamara comes back from injury and sees 20 touches straight away. Maybe he does. But now Mark Ingram, I think, is on the COVID list. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he is. He's on the COVID list.
Yeah, and I wrote down the Jets. It was a good matchup, but with him being on the COVID list, with Alvin Kamara coming back, do you still hang on to him? I mean, I guess maybe you can slide him into your IR spot.
If you can slide him in your IR, I know that it just kind of depends on the league there. And with Taysom Hill going too, I think that plays a role. Like, we mentioned, Taysom Hill there, they're going to run a little bit more. If Kamara's coming back, I think Ingram is definitely, I'm cutting him. Like, I don't necessarily see if those guys come back healthy and they have it, and it looks like he's vaccinated. That's what it says on Fantasy Pros. They talk about they think he's vaccinated, but we don't know. So as long as he has 2 negative tests, 24 hours apart, he'll be all right. I don't think you start him unless you need like a touchdown. Like, you're going to say, hey, he's going to score a touchdown for us. I think Kamara coming back is going to get a big workload, and then Hill's going to cut into that upside as well. So I don't see him being that guy.
Yeah, like this week, the Jets, that would have been like a decent matchup to say, hey, he's okay in this one. Real quick, Kenny Golladay, 63.9% rostered. He's had one decent week this year, 17.6, week 4. Otherwise, he's been under 10.5 fantasy points in 8 games he's appeared in. I don't see a reason to keep Kenny Golladay at this point. And no. What is going to hurt any chance, in my opinion, of him being an asset this year is if Sterling Shepard gets healthy, for one. Also, if Kadarius Toney's healthy. Both of those guys have been out of the mix. And even with those guys out of the mix, he's just like out there and he gets banged up almost every single game. I don't see a world where I want to play Kenny Golladay.
No, Jake Fromm. Like, that's really all you need to know. Like, Jake Fromm, his quarterback play has been awful. And, Kenny hasn't looked good when any of these receivers have been out. And even Ingram has kind of taken a few targets away from him, and that's pretty crazy to say. So, No, you can't trust – I cannot trust Kenny Golladay if Jake Fromm is throwing him the ball.
Devonta Smith, Heisman Trophy winner, 87.8% rostered. He's at under 11 fantasy points 3 games in a row now. Back-to-back weeks also with only 4 targets, which was interesting because one of those games, I think it was two games ago, he was like livid on the sideline. He was pissed off. And I saw reports saying, he was mad about not being involved. And then the very next week, he got 4 targets again, like not involved again. 62% of the snaps played in the last game in comparison to the typical like 90%-ish games that he usually plays in. What's our thoughts here on Devonta Smith?
Yeah, it's weird too, right? Because when you're looking at his target share and what he's been able to do, you've seen it go down a little bit. And that's weird, especially last game when we looked at what they did against the Jets. 33-18, Minshew looked great. Dallas Goedert had a couple of big plays. And, also, he hasn't had more than 6 targets since week 7. And even then, he only had 2 other games where he had that up to week 4. So he doesn't get targeted that much. With that rushing attack, with Hurts being there, I know Minshew was there. I'm still holding him, though. I think he's too talented not to hold. Like, I think that you can go in there with Washington, the Giants, and Washington. I think there's a realistic expectation that they're going to be in, especially against Washington, some negative game scripts where they're going to have to throw the ball. If Minshew's starting, maybe they give him the ball early, and maybe this bye week they work some game plans in, especially some offensive scheme stuff in for him, which I expect them to do. So I would hold him. He's too talented to kind of cut at this point. He's way more talented probably than anybody else on this list. I
agree. I'm keeping him. Weeks 9 and 10, it's funny to look at the numbers, but exactly on the dot, 22.6, 2 weeks in a row, weeks 9 and 10. Yeah. Earlier this season, he had some decent targeted games, 10 target game in week 4. The very next week, he had 9 targets. You mentioned the schedule. I think the schedule is to his advantage coming up. Washington gives up the 3rd most points per game to the wide receiver position. The Giants give up the 9th most points per game to the wide receiver position. And then they play Washington again. So he's got 3 weeks in a row against teams that give up a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers. So I can see his involvement in the offense, his production all swinging up, because he is a big part of their future. And I think him being pissed off about his involvement and his lack of targets and lack of usage, I think will definitely settle in, and they'll make sure to get him more involved in these next few games. I'm keeping him. I'm not cutting him.
No, keep him, and just roll with it and hope that they have it. But I think there's a realistic thing. If they bring Hurts back, it hurts his upside. I really do. Like, I know people love Hurts. I get it. Like, there's Hurts truthers out there. I'm never gonna be one of those. But it doesn't hurt his upside going forward. But this year, you hope that he has a couple big games at the end and he kind of scores those touchdowns and gets those targets. That's what you're looking for.
Last one on our list, and then we'll move on. Antonio Brown, 77.5% rostered. He's had an ankle injury that's kept him out for a handful of games. Now he is also serving a suspension for violating the joint NFL and a lot of other letters here, NFLPA COVID-19 protocols. He's had some really nice games this season. In his first 5 games, he was great, actually. 23.7, 31.4, 24.3 in some of those games that actually appeared in. Some people I've seen some people say, hey, if he comes back for championship week, he can be a huge piece of your team. You don't know if you're going to get there. Bank on like the moves that you can make now to get yourself to the championship. Don't look ahead to the championship and say, hey, I should stash this guy because when I get there, then I can use him. You need to get there first. So that's the reason I'm out, because I'm not going to just hold on to a guy when I need to win right now every single week. What's your thought?
You and me, we're gonna disagree on this because he plays the Jets, Nick. They play the Jets that last game of the championship week, and I really feel like Antonio Brown's a head case, like he is. But I mean, if you had him on your roster now and you're winning, you probably could realistically hold him. Like, there's probably guys that you can put in there. I mean, let's say that if you lack depth, okay, fine. But I think I would try to do whatever I could to keep him on your roster, especially in redraft. If you feel like your team is strong enough and you don't need that extra, whoever you're going to pick up off the waiver, if you feel like you can have him, I think he could have a good game that last game of the year. Now, that would be I think that's the first game he could play, right? Week 17, if I can do math. I don't know like what the COVID protocols are, but yeah, so I think it's week 17. So if that is the first game, you got to worry about, hey, will he be out there conditioning, those type of things. But he's the type of guy that they're going to get the ball early. Brady likes him. I wouldn't mind taking a risk on. He's the one guy I would take a risk on just because of those big numbers we saw in the first 5 weeks.
Would you hoard running backs if you had the opportunity to do so instead of taking him, or would you still keep him?
Nah, I'd keep him. I mean, who are you going to hoard though? Like, who are you going to grab? Like,
I don't know, like Amir Abdullah.
I mean, we're getting pretty deep out here. Like, it's getting pretty. I mean, yeah, I guess if you can get one, I guess if you could maybe pick up a backup or whatever, like maybe you want to solidify your guys. Like, I would say if your running back depth is low and you feel like going in, injuries happen. We know that maybe. But if you feel like you have 3 guys, like to me, 3 running backs is good enough. Like, hey, if you feel like you got 3 dudes that can go into the championships and go there, Antonio Brown wouldn't be a bad little stash.
All right. So let's shift over to some different topics here. So we actually touched on almost the opposite of this earlier. We talked about what to do if you are not going to make the playoffs this year. And now let's talk about the guys that are actually contending. You're making the playoffs. You're trying to make some moves. This is probably more of a dynasty thing because redraft trades are typically closed at a certain point of the year. A lot of dynasty leagues are the trade deadline is wide open. Some it's not, but contenders. So let's say you can make trades right now. I'm in a league right now that I'm not making the playoffs. I won last year in this specific league, and now I'm not making the playoffs this year. It was disappointing. But the first thing I did was I threw a bunch of veterans on the block, like a typical sleeper move, and said, hey, if you are contending this year, throw me anything for these guys. And I actually made a deal yesterday for one guy. But who are some trade targets for contenders? So you think you can win? Who are you going after from those teams that are not going to make the playoffs? Give me one guy.
I think the perfect guy is Josh Jacobs. I think volume is king. Kenyon Drake's gone. They're going to rely on him a little bit. You saw he had 13 attempts last game against Washington. He scored a touchdown. He look at what he did in the receiving game. So, and with what he did there, he had 9 targets and 9 receptions. He had 24 points, and He's had double-digit points. He had 24-19 in the last 2 games. Again, he plays Kansas City, Cleveland, Denver. He's got okay matchups, but I think volume is king for running backs. They're going to rely on him with Drake being gone. I think he's a good value right now. And we know, going through some trades that I've seen from him, if you have Derrick Henry and you're a competing team, so this guy traded Derrick Henry for Josh Jacobs and Cordero Patterson. I think that's an excellent move to go try to win it. Like, hey, let's go try to take this thing. Henry's older. Give me a younger asset in Jacobs, whatever everybody thinks of Jacobs. Like, those are the type of deals I think you can make. Saquon Barkley for Josh Jacobs and 2 firsts. Hey, I'll do that all day, especially if I'm competing and I get the first. Maybe that's how you do it. Like, those are the type of deals if I can get those are there. And hey, Josh Jacobs went straight up for Mike Williams in a second. Again, like,
interesting.
If you can get Jacobs right now, I think he's a pretty good value, and I think he's going to get volume. Running backs need volume. He's going to get it.
I think that a lot of people had major knocks in him throughout the entire season, and it didn't have a lot to do with injuries, but a lot of his games have not. I guess it's just because he hasn't, like, before the bye, he had 3 games in a row with 15 to 16 fantasy points. So somewhere in between there. It's not bad. I mean, he's not winning you the week, but that's very useful.
Yeah.
I think
it's solid. He's running back 17, which he's still a running back 2. Like, and you drafted him as a running back.
He missed 2 games.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're looking at what he's been able to produce out of the 10 games that he's played, he's averaging 15.2 PPR points per game. Like, he's solid, right? That's what the thing about him was. He's solid.
And now the ceiling has continued to raise because now the involvement in the passing game is very much so there. And they're going to bring up, I think Jalen Richard is, like, back in the mix, but who cares about that? He had 9 catches last game. A couple of weeks prior, he had 2 5-catch games, weeks 10 and 11. I mean, that's huge for PPR. And he's actually playing really well. He's running really well. The last 3 games in a row, he's averaged 4 yards per carry. I mean, that's pretty decent. That's pretty decent. Back-to-back weeks, he's been solid. So I'm completely with you there for Josh Jacobs. I think he's a good player rest of the season. My guy that I think is a good target, and I'm not, it depends what you're sending for him, but I think it's Rob Gronkowski, because I don't think that the guy who has Gronkowski, who finished in last in your Dynasty League or has no chance at all of making the playoffs, is going to stash Gronkowski for the long run. I think a lot of guys in Dynasty who don't do well in a particular year are trying to off-haul their old guys. So I think with him being an older guy, even though he's been really good, I think that he's a guy that people are going to want to sell. And he checks a lot of the boxes right now. He's healthy. He's had consistent targets, 8, 9, and 8 the last 3. And then he's had consistent fantasy production. It's not the fear of, well, maybe it's a Evans day. Maybe it's a Godwin day like it was last week. Or maybe it's a whoever else day. It's Gronkowski every week, it seems like right now. 13.1, which is actually good for the tight end position. 19.3 and 21.8 fantasy points the last 3 games. He's been tight end 2 during the span. Kittle had that massive week, or else it'd probably be Gronk the last couple of weeks being the tight end 1. So I think that for me personally, rest of season, Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, those guys are for sure above him. I don't know what's up with Waller. I don't know when he's going to be 100%. I don't know if I have another guy above Gronkowski for the tight end position the rest of the season. So if I'm really gunning for a title and I don't have Kelsey, Andrews, or Kittle, I think I'm going for Gronk. I mean, I guess there's a couple guys you can throw in there and say, this guy's had some good weeks this season. Dawson Knox has been pretty good this season. We saw great things out of Kyle Pitts, but he's been kind of quiet. But what's your thoughts on Gronkowski for a contender target?
I think, it's perfect. He's the type of asset you go grab because he's still relatively cheap because he's old. So when you're looking at it, these guys, they can't get too much from you. I looked it up while you were talking. I wanted to go on Trade Finder for DLF. Rob Gronkowski and a 4th for Nico Collins. I mean, I know you like Nico. I joke with you about
at this point. It's kind of like,
American Football League, baby. But Rob, I mean, that's not. Hey, you need a tight end. Go and maybe you chase the upside of Nico. I wouldn't chase the upside of Nico, but this guy did.
No.
And he did it. Donovan Peoples-Jones in a 3rd for Rob Gronkowski. That just happened 3 days ago. hey, you know what? Like, those are the type of deals like where if you want to go get a tight end, especially with what he's going to compete in, and if Antonio Brown is out, go grab him. I mean, yeah. Now, would you give up a second next year for him?
If I am lacking at tight end position and I'm like the 1 seed right now, I would.
Okay.
And I don't think that when we get to that rookie draft, I might look back and be like, shit, like that was probably not the best move, right? But is it worth it right? Is it worth it right now? I think so.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think so too. I if it's a late second anyway, right? Especially in this class. Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, everybody out there, it's pretty top heavy. I would say by the 205, 206, it's gonna get a little. So if you're looking at that, hey, I wouldn't mind grabbing that.
Who's another guy that you have that comes to mind? If you are a contender, here's a good target.
I picked TJ Hawkinson because I do think that there's some stuff about it. He hasn't had an amazing year that everybody thought he was going to have. But even though he hasn't had an amazing year, he's still tied in 3 on the year, which that tells you everything you know about tight ends. Yep. But when you're looking at him and the last 3 weeks, he's been okay, 11, 12, and 14. He's had 2 touchdowns back-to-back games. He's got an okay matchups as he comes down the stretch. But I like him because I do think that you can get him from maybe a non-contender for the reason that you can probably get some value for him. And I do think that like if it's a premium league or if it's a late first, I don't mind maybe giving up Hawkins, especially if you need a tight end. If you need a first, give up a 2022 first for Hawkinson if you need a tight end, because there's no tight ends in next year's class. So if you're looking at your roster and you're like, hey, can I find one? Like there's a couple okay ones, McBride, Weidemeyer, some other guys. There's no one like Hawkinson. So if you're willing to kind of give up something for him, I would do that. And I wouldn't mind going after Hawkinson. It's a little bit steeper price than like these other guys we're going to talk about. But I don't hate it. I don't hate going after him, get a little steeper price and getting a guy like him because he's going to last on your team too.
Yeah, that and for him in comparison to the position, I mean, the last 3 weeks, 2 of them were 8-target games. If we look back, week 6 and 8, 11-target games. So, he's not doing what he did the first 2 weeks, over 20 fantasy points. But can he? Sure. And right now, I think looking at the position and looking at the playoffs, I think it's literally the best position to try to get a good cushion for because it's so hard to do that with the running back position, and wide receivers are so sporadic that you can make these moves. And then like guys we mentioned before, Russell Gage can have back-to-back weeks where he's like a wide receiver 1, like random guys can do that. The tight end position doesn't really work that way with the the heaviest of the guys. So I'm with you for TJ Hawkinson. Would you send Big Pat Freiermuth in a deal to get Hawkinson, or would you roll with Big Pat?
I would trade Big Pat for Hawkinson. Yes, I'm not a Pat guy, so I would definitely give up him for Hawkinson.
Notice how I always refer to him as Big Pat as like a nickname that I gave him because I don't want to say the last name all the time.
Freiermuth.
I can say it. It just doesn't like come out like good enough for me.
Okay.
My guy, and I was a little spicy about this guy on Twitter the other day. And it's a hard, he's probably a hard target to trade for, but I wrote down Deontay Johnson because me personally, Nick, so I'm not saying everybody in the world should do this, but I would actually do it. If I had AJ Brown, if I had DK Metcalf, if I had Deebo Samuel, and somebody was going to offer me in Dynasty Deontay Johnson, he's laughing at me. No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry, coughing. I'm a little sick right now. And
you're good. No, if I had AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, and somebody offered me Deontay Johnson plus right now, I would 100% take it. Me personally, and when we look at I brought it up when we look at dynasty rankings, AJ Brown and Deontay Johnson have a huge gap between them two. But if we look at a lot of things, I mean, AJ Brown can bust open, the field and have a massive game for 200 receiving yards on 2 plays and be the wide receiver 1 of the week. Deontay Johnson is extremely, extremely consistent. He has performed at a decent ceiling, and he's been widely available for his entire career. If I look at the career comparisons, of Deontay Johnson, A.J. Brown, and DK Metcalf. Deontay Johnson leads all three in receptions. And you would think that he's way behind in touchdowns between the two, but he's not. 25 to A.J., 22 to DK, and Deontay Johnson's got 18. Receiving yards, he's behind them too, but again, not by a lot. I don't think that there's a massive gap between him and those other two guys personally. And I know a lot of people say, Big Ben, well, it's because of Big Ben. He gives him the ball nonstop. He gives him all these targets. I mean, he's had 5 games of exactly 13 targets. He's had 9 games with 10 or more targets because of Big Ben. And those people, to me, kind of make me laugh at times because they're literally telling me that in Dynasty, for the rest of Deontay Johnson's career, there's never going to be a better quarterback than Big Ben. That's what you are telling me, that it's not going to get better, which is insane to me. It's insane to me. So sorry for the rant, but I would trade those guys for Deontay Johnson plus if I'm a contender and I wanted to win this year, because you're not going to win with those other guys. That's it.
I agree. I love Deontay. Deontay was my wide receiver 12 coming into the season. I got some shit for it. Everybody laughed at me. And I said, hey, he's, the targets thing makes me laugh too. And I'm glad you earn your damn targets. He earns his targets. Like, and when we're looking at what he does on the field, he earns them, and he has them. And hey, he hasn't dropped a lot of passes. I know he dropped that touchdown last game, but he was there, like he had it. And I think a deal that I really like from him greatly is I've been seeing Calvin Ridley go for Deontay straight up. I think 100%. I'd rather have Deontay, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So that's an interesting kind of guy to look at. Like if you have Calvin, you're on a team that's kind of in that middle ground. Maybe you do that deal and you see, hey, Calvin's going to be out of it. So that maybe he's banking on him coming back, but I think I'd rather have Deontay. Maybe you have to add something right now to Calvin because of the kind of uncertainty, but I still think I would like Calvin in a third or Calvin even in a second. I think Deontay is that good.
He's very good and he's very consistent. It's not like, a lot of people will say, well, he gets all these catches and targets, but his ceiling is not as high. I mean, he's had plenty of games above 20 fantasy points this season. He just had a 30.5 fantasy point game. I think, who knows what's going to happen in Pittsburgh? Watch one Wilson or Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that goes to Pittsburgh, and then what? We're going to keep saying that he's so far behind these other guys from the same class. I don't know, but right now I think he has the better odds of winning you a championship. So I'll try to get him if it means losing one of those other guys. Personally. All right, last thing, because we're getting close to the hour mark. Give me one start of the week. I typically at the end of the week I do like a random video with some of my favorite plays. Just give me one. I'm going to only say one as well for this.
So for me on this one, I'm going to go Marquise Brown. Playing Cleveland, I think he's got a good matchup. He's gone 4 games in a row without a touchdown, but I think he's going to score this week. But I think he's big outing here against Cleveland in Week 12. Brown had 10 targets, 8 catches, and he looked good. He just didn't have the yards that equate that in the touchdown. So you're going to see that a guy doesn't get 10 targets, doesn't produce. So I think Marquise Brown's going to have a bounce back game against Cleveland. So I expect him to finish as a low end wide receiver 1.
I actually overpaid for Marquise Brown in a dynasty league that I have a for sure first round buy-in this year. I completely overpaid, and I felt like I had to because I was lacking at the wide receiver position. And I've actually been pretty anti Hollywood Brown for a while. I look silly for it because he's actually been very good this season. He's been really good, and the targets have been great. I mean, I think in the past I was kind of worried about that, like, oh, does this guy need a big play to happen for him to be relevant? But when he's seeing all these games, 10 targets or more, it looks good. And I like that call for a bounce back week. Where for Marquise Brown, do you think so this is what I did. Maybe I probably overpaid. I have Kyle Pitts on a team, and I also have Darren Waller, and Darren Waller was hurt at the time. So I traded Darren Waller, and I'm right now I'm the best record in this team, this league, but it doesn't mean I'm going to win. But I traded Darren Waller in a first for Marquise Brown. What you think? I completely lost that one, or what?
Darren Waller in a first for Marquise. That's pretty.
I have Kyle Pitts. That's still
a big boy trade right there. That's a lot.
Kind of had to.
Did you though? Did you have to? Did you really have to? I would, Waller in a second, I feel like is better fair value than that. But if it's late first, he's shown out this year, and you've seen what he's been able to do. And I don't think Bateman is going to have that big of an impact. I think they can have two alphas on that team. So, like, if I was going to make an argument for that trade, I think you paid a little bit too much, but I don't hate it. If you have Pitts, I don't hate it.
I'll hate it at the rookie draft. I'll be like, mother.
You're gonna hate a little bit. You're gonna just hate a little bit.
Unbelievable. Yeah, the guy kind of smashed on that one. But
if you win, it doesn't matter.
I'm just playing to win. I should have like a button that plays, like there's an explosion button that comes on the screen or something like that when I drop the play to win tagline. My guy for the week, and then we'll wrap things up. And I feel a little iffy about it because it doesn't like flow out super smooth, but maybe it's the Jacksonville matchup. But I wrote down Deonta Foreman, and I'm really curious to see what happens between Hilliard, who's been great. He's been great the last two games. And McNichols when they both play. Some guys, say Hilliard's like the guy in that system now. And, McNichols was out of the picture. I don't know. I really just don't know what it's going to look like. I think Foreman is still ahead of those guys. And even though he didn't play as many snaps, I think, as him last game, he still had the most of the carries. 19 for 109 versus New England, who's not a walk in the park for Foreman in his last game. The Jags are a middle-of-the-road team when it comes to points per game against the running back position. But this is what I was looking at the last 2 weeks for the Jaguars. Sony Michel just ripped them apart for 121 rushing yards and a touchdown. The week before that, Patterson went for 108 on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So we're seeing back-to-back games for the Jaguars just giving up tons of yards and touchdowns on the ground to running backs. I think he's going to need to score, but I think if he gets what he had last time, 19 carries, somewhere around that range and scores, I think Foreman is due for a big day. Hopefully it doesn't turn into some weird 3-back committee and they all get equal touches, or he's like the third back. But I think if Foreman gets the volume, he's going to be a good play this week.
Yeah, I think it's a risk, but I like it. If he can get the volume there, it's all about volume, right? And I think it's going to be about the game script there. But the Jags are a good. You got to like that. So if it's Jags, you're going to love that matchup. So I think those both are good. I think Marquise Brown is there. I think Foreman is good, especially with the volume. If he gets the volume. Volume matters. Volume is king with running backs. That's all I care about anymore. Just volume. If he gets the volume, okay. But like you said, where's that volume going to come from? Hilliard, all that kind of different areas there. But if he does get it, I think it's a smash play.
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting. I think a lot of people will be mad if like McNichols comes in and gets all the passing work and Hilliard doesn't, or if Hilliard ends up carrying the ball to what Foreman did, just because he also went for a big day last week. So it'll be interesting, and it's funny that we're talking about these 3 guys right now. And that's just it's that time of year. It's that time of year.
Week 14, baby.
Week 14. We're getting close to the playoffs here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Good shows. We'll be rolling through the rest of the fantasy playoffs as well. Kevin, anything you want to plug before we close things up? Anything coming up that's cool that you want to drop in at the end here?
If you like college football, over at Fantasy Points, which Nick is obviously a part of, and there we're going to be doing a college football preview and a big bull guide. So be on the lookout for that. And we're doing a bunch of different stuff with a bunch of great people. So it's the content that you would brought.
All right, so definitely check that out. At some point, probably pretty soon, as soon as we know it, we'll be looking at the next generation of NFL players and the rookies incoming, and that's a huge time of year. So getting a jump on some college talk is big, especially if you are starting to focus on that the next wave of guys in dynasty leagues. But for me, random stuff throughout the week. Probably do another like board session sort of thing, maybe on Friday, some other random stuff through the week. But if you guys tuned in, appreciate you guys. We do this weekly on Wednesdays. I won't be on the Fantasy Points Extra Point show this Sunday, but I will be the rest of the way. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Have a good night and good luck this week.